Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and thank you for joining Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome back to the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of the saying, there are those that know what they know, there are those that know what they don't know, and then there are those that don't know what they don't know. And that is where we find ourselves in the firearms industry. And more importantly, sometimes even the dishonesty on how firearms are made and why. So we want to go at this full bore and talk about the importance of the curvature of the bore and the firearms industry's dirty little secret. All right, so first I would like to say thank you to Krieger Barrels. Krieger is a proud sponsor of the show, a maker of world-class fine cut rifled barrels, and they have their new store called Krieger Direct, where you can log on and get your barrel in as little as 3 to 4 business days. So if you need a barrel and you need it now, you can stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com. Also, we'd like to thank Wolf Precision's online long-range shooting school is now a proud sponsor of the podcast, in which we are going to be posting and hosting nearly 200 pieces of content that cover our entire online long-range shooting school, and it is there at your fingertips. So it is in process. You can now sign up today for half off, and you can follow us along as we keep posting and updating all of the current content, with the entire shooting school being posted up through the course of the year, so you can follow us along piece by piece as all of the contents get posted. So stop over to wolfprecision.net and look for our online long-range shooting school and sign up early and get half off. All right, so we had spent some time with some customers talking about knowing what you don't know, and more importantly, the curvature of the bore or the crooked throat and what it plays with accuracy. And you know, he had said to me that I've done a great job explaining it in the class, and one of the things that he was shocked about was the fact that in all his years, he has never heard of this subject being brought up, whether it's factory rifles or custom. And that, you know, maybe we can take a little time on the podcast or even trying to explain to people, because it is an industry insider, dirty little secret type thing, and it is mum's the word. And, you know, when everybody knows it's a problem and nobody either knows what to do with it or they just simply choose not to, because there's been this level of acceptance and this is how we've done it and this is how we always will. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about the curvature of the bore, what's known and what's not known about it, and then go into talking about the industry itself and how they've sort of ignored it and maybe why. So when I was building custom rifles, one of the biggest issues that I learned about when going through the process of making a perfectly straight throat in a rifle was the deal with the curvature of the bore and how it affects or has a crooked throat. So if you take a floating reamer, which is how your chambers are traditionally cut, and it's sort of being held on a center or a floating point on the back, and the tip has a bushing on it that follows the rifling, and it goes several inches deep into the barrel. Well, one of the dirty secrets in the industry is that they all know this is a problem. I mean, I can go back to talk about one of Gunworks recently posted podcasts where they had talked about, you know, just being open and honest, which I thought was awesome, right? We're all friends in the industry. We all know each other well, but they had talked about and publicly stated the failure rate of their quote unquote factory, quote unquote custom rifles, right? And that it was something like 10 or 20% had to go back through for whatever reason. They couldn't quite figure it out. that wouldn't make the grade. That when they were finally produced and then sent to testing and evaluation, that they had to go back. They did not meet the accuracy standards that they had. Now, kudos to those guys for setting a standard and testing and evaluating and all of these things. And the same thing holds true with major manufacturing, right? I remember when we first patented the ACE, I got a phone call from her name was Ginger Chandler. She was the vice president of Remington Arms, and she had called my wife at the shop, and she was like, "Hey, I'd like to talk to Jamie a little bit about this ACE thing that they're working on, and if he can give me a call back, I'd really appreciate it." So my wife called me on the cell phone and said, "Hey, a girl named Ginger Chandler called and wants to talk to you about the ACE." And I said, "Oh, who's that?" She goes, "Well, it's the vice president of Remington Arms." And I was like, "Wow, that's interesting. All right, so let's make a call." So I called her, and the first words out of her mouth was, "You're fixing the curvature to the bore." And I was stunned that she got it. A lot of people, mistake it that it's just trying to reinvent a part for no reason whatsoever, or to do something different, but she got it right out of the gate. She knew exactly why we designed this. And I was so impressed. I mean, I got a chance to speak with her many times before they went bankrupt. And unfortunately, she had moved on to a different career. Super smart person. Certainly was in the right position for that job. But she knew why we invented the ACE right out of the gate. And I said to her, "Hey, I'm totally flabbergasted that you get it, that I didn't even have to say it." And she goes, "Oh my God." She goes, "If you only knew the problems that this creates in manufacturing, like, the faster you make the barrels, the more you get the curvature of the bore, the more the negative effect it is." And we've talked about it in the past where as you get a crooked throat, if you can picture deep into the barrel where you've got the lands and groove being cut back into a little bit of an angle, and that's a transition period for the bullet to start into the rifling. Well, if that's crooked, your bullet can start into the throat crooked, or it hits it on one side first and the other, and it creates all kinds of issues. And, they're like, "We know it's a problem. It's just we've never come up with a way to deal with it." And it causes a massive problems for rifles to come back all the time. And so when you start talking about failure rates or rifles that, their goal was to make massive amounts of firearms within a tolerable range that customers would swallow. And so they pushed it as hard as they could to get it just so it would pass muster, but they could do it in massive manufacturing. So they weren't looking for, quarter-inch guns or guns capable of winning bench rests. They wanted deer-killing rifles that a customer might be happy with the potential groups, or let the customer worry about trying to find a picky load for it. But that's what major manufacturing does. And one of the things that sort of fascinated me with, I went down and had some meetings with them, and we had talked about some of the different projects that they were working on. And when I went to a show, and I might have mentioned this in a later podcast, Ginger had told some of their guys to stop over to our booth and say hi and spend some time hanging out a little bit. And when the guys showed up, it was the NRA annual meeting. This was years ago. When the guys from Remington showed up and were chit-chatting a little bit, the one gentleman, probably in his late 50s, early 60-ish, was in charge and working in manufacturing and stuff. And, he had said, "Look, this is the way it's been done. This is the way we've always done it. And it works just fine." And I said to the guy, I said to him, one of the reasons why the whole industry is sort of being held back and that big changes aren't being made in the quality of firearms themselves is because people like you in the position that you're in just stifle any advancement. Because if it costs more to manufacture it, if it slows down production, or you have to buy more machines, or it doesn't make, then you kill it. And the guy couldn't say anything. I mean, I was right. And, I don't care if I offended him. I don't work for the guy. And shame on you. You're running a business as if you don't care about the quality of the product. You only care if it's just good enough that most customers won't complain. And the same thing went with another major manufacturer. I've got a chance to meet a lot of really cool people in the industry over the years. And so I'm not bashing any of these people. But what I'm saying is this is how it works. Like, we talked to a very popular American manufacturer, and had some conversations with the president and vice president of the companies. And the one thing that they brought up was that they were so heavily invested in the processes and the tooling that creates a rifle from start to finish, that interrupting that process for any length of period of time or changing it could bankrupt them, because they're working on pennies on the dollar for profit. So the whole industry has done this race to the bottom. Find a way to make it cheaper, less expensive, more profitable. Find a way to make it cheaper, less expensive, more profitable. Find a way to make it cheaper, less expensive to the customer, more profitable to us. You can only do that so many times until you're left with just a product that barely cuts mustard. You're barely making any money, and you're competing for pennies and nickels and dimes against the other competitors. That's a race to the bottom. And in business terms, that's a bad place to be in, right? But he was right. He knew right out of the gate that millions and millions of dollars have been invested in over the last several years, trying to up manufacturing and getting the rifles to where they can make them faster, more efficiently, getting them out to the customers less expensive. And, he knew that any disruption in just shutting the plant down for a couple of weeks to start working on installing a new process or processes, that it could bankrupt them. That's the level that they were working at. And I often find it amazing how an industry winds up here. If you do some research and you go back and you read a lot of the original history of Remington Arms, and you talk a lot about, or if you read a lot about people who have come up with great inventions in the firearms industry to take it to manufacturing or to take it to, military law enforcement applications, right? You'll commonly read that regardless of the industry, and firearms industry is no different than anyone else, is they will look at that and they will say, we can make the perfect product, but we can make a product just as good by separating out these parts and pieces, and by shortening this production here, and by using a different material here, and it's almost good enough. It's good enough. It doesn't have to be to that level. And they will start to whittle down the quality of the product to either simplify the productivity, to simplify the processes, to maximize profits, to minimize investments in tooling. And so you wind up with what originally was a great product, and it just gets crushed by all these other forces coming in and whittling it down to nothing and reducing what makes it so special and such a high quality or precision part. The reason I'm talking about this is how important is the curvature of the bore and being able to cut a perfectly straight throat. The problem lies in this. You can't cut a straight throat in a barrel that has a curved bore. You just can't do it. I mean, we used to use spiders to dial the curvature out at the point where we predicted the throat would be. So it's a thing called spiders. Huge process to go through, even on custom firearms making, let alone any type of consistent manufacturing, right? And we could get a pretty straight throat. But it's still, we were dialing out the curvature of the barrel individually to each individual fingerprint, or what the curve in that barrel was like, because each one is different. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just how the drilling process for making the lands and grooves goes. So the invention of the ACE was really designed to say, okay, look, we know the first inch is the straightest. What if we got the chamber out of the way and we attached it after we cut the throat? Because we know we can cut the throat in the very end of the barrel in the straightest portion in a nice rigid setup to where we're not following that curvature of the bore deep into the barrel several inches. We're only going in 120 thousandths, That's how deep your throat goes in, less than a quarter of an inch. So we can get in there, we can cut a perfectly straight throat in a very controlled manner. But the key to it is we can do it consistently the same every single time. So you in manufacturing, you will always fall victim to your processes. So it's not that you can't do something great. It's can you set it up that you can do it the same way every time and get predictable results? And here's where the ACE comes into play, is that, you've got companies like, Remington, who has unfortunately gone out of business, and other manufacturers who are following and building rifles the same way they did in 1880, for crying out loud. 1880. Like when I talked to the guy from Remington that went to the show, and he was like this pompous 58-year-old that was probably in that position for 20 years. I'm like, dude, we weren't even in cars yet. We were riding around in a horse and buggies. There's no comparison to where we're at now and what we can do in manufacturing. It's just you're lazy. You're lazy. So the fact that we're still here nearly 140 years later, chambering a rifle barrel the same way, tells you that we've got stuck in these processes that come out in World War I, then through World War II, and we've accepted that level of accuracy as well. And on a manufacturing side, we've accepted the failure rate, which is the big one, right? When you're making 10 and 20% of your stuff has to come back and be redone because it's not making the cut, that's a problem, right? And so even when a big name like Gunworks comes out and publicly gives and you can find their website, you can find their podcast. I'm not sure which number was, right around 100, but they talk about manufacturing processes and some of the problems that they ran into, and they explain their own numbers. I'm not going to speak that here for them, but that's the problem. And here's the thing, right, is we've been doing this with the Ace for more than 5 to 7 years now. We've not had one come back. Not a single rifle. When I was talking to Bruce Thom at Bat Machine here, we've got another project we're working on, by the way, which is really cool. We can't talk about it yet, but we've got something that's going to go right in hand with the Ace. It's just going to take, everything's just building on itself, right? But Bruce had said to me, he just got back from SHOT Show for 2022, and he said, every year I go to SHOT Show, and every year, you see, somebody coming up, but they've got the greatest invention of the century, and they've got the thing that's going to change the industry. And, most of the time it's just a different colored stock or, a new trigger or something like that. He said, but truthfully, rarely does any of it ever come to fruition. Like it doesn't come around. It falls apart. It never really comes together. And he had said to me, he'd called and we were talking about some different projects we're working on. And he said, Jamie, he said, the ACE system that you developed there is probably, honestly, the biggest step forward in firearms manufacturing in the last 100 years. And, I can't thank Bruce for saying enough and for saying that because, he is a mentor to me. He's been my friend forever. He's a little bit older. Well, actually, he's a lot older, but, he's a super smart machinist. He's a super smart custom rifle builder because he was passionate about shooting. And so to have somebody at that status, make a comment about a product like that, just for me was just like, I couldn't help but say thanks for saying something like that because it really made my day. That's someone that I admire and whose word I admire a lot. Like to have somebody like that give you a compliment just means a lot, and it meant a lot to me. So, but what has happened in the industry is we've still fallen prey to this. Like here we have a way to make a rifle to where we have been building these, myself and Bruce. So Bruce is heavily involved in this, and they do a lot of the manufacturing at Bat Machine in Idaho. We haven't had one come back. And Bruce has built several prototypes for competitive shooters out that way that were either sponsored shooters or in-house, production guns that they've rebarreled over and over and over again. And he's just always floored that they shoot the same every single time. And they just hold that level. And that was the missing piece. Is you've got to get rid of that curvature to the bore. You've got to find a way to get a reliably, consistently straight throat at the start of the rifling and then make a perfectly straight and true chamber and attach it afterwards. And that's what we were after. Someone had said to me once, they said that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Common sense and experience tells you don't put it in a fruit salad, right? When people in the industry know that something's a problem and either they're just too lazy to do anything about it, they just don't want to change any of their processes because why? Or, you take and you just keep trying to refine a broken process that just produces the same result regardless of how you do it. You have CNCs now cutting chambers in the barrels. You've got different fixtures that people are using. But in the end, you're trying to make a great product out of an imperfect part with an imperfect process. And one of the things I want you to think about when you listen to this podcast is I'm not here trying to oversell or undersell anything, but I want to make sure that I'm doing my job explaining what the curvature of the bore is and just how detrimental it is to the accuracy of a rifle or the potential accuracy that it's taking away from the barrel because of the process of chambering old school, right? Before you've heard this on this podcast, or if you've been through this shooting school, or if we've talked at a gun show, how many times have you ever heard of the subject being brought up of the curvature to the bore or the rifling being bowed inside a rifle barrel? And if the answer is you never did, then that's the secret. Every major manufacturer in the world knows this is a problem, whether it's a barrel maker themselves or the people that are producing the rifles. And because they don't have an answer or don't want to look for one or work for one, then the best thing to do is just to say nothing and keep going about your business. Because if the world doesn't know there's a problem, then they don't have to worry about fixing it. And so now you know what you don't know. You know what they're not saying. And now, as an educated buyer, you have a choice. Yeah, our rifles are a little bit more expensive, but we've always went through the process of, we're trying to build the perfect rifle, which is where the ACE came from. It was micromanaging every part and piece of the rifle, trying to come up with a way to make a perfect rifle, but not just make one. Find a way that we can make 100, and if we can make 100, we can make 1,000. If we can make 1,000, we can make 10,000. And that's the processes. That's why the ACE became what it is because, okay, we've made and we now have what we think is the best of perfect action in every way, shape, or form, exactly the way it's supposed to be. And now we've got the barrel to deal with, and we know we want this quality, but what do we do with the curvature of the bore? That's the elephant in the room that means that they can be all over the place from lot to lot. They can be different from barrel to barrel. How do we address this so we can make the perfect rifle? And so we came up with this entire process that the barrel goes through on its own, but then we actually manufacture the chamber, which joins the barrel to the receiver and deals with the curvature of the bore and finally allowing that bullet a straight, perfect shot into the rifling from the start, which is the key to the accuracy. So I hope it helps explain a little bit. You can log on to our YouTube channel, or I'm sure if you've been on our website, you'll see that we did a video talking about the curvature of the bore. But I'm just going to throw it out there again that, look, one of the reasons why it exists is trying to create, or it's trying to fix a problem that everybody knows exists, and yet nobody talks about, especially in the industry. Mum's the word. Whether it's they don't want to invest, they don't want to work. I'm often shocked at when it comes to loosening the purse strings a little bit to create a better product, just the buck stops there. We want a great thing, but no. What you mean we got to stop and we got to add 3 or 4 more processes to building a rifle? Well, we only make $50 or whatever they're saying that they make on a rifle. Well, whose fault's that? You're the one that put yourself in this corner. And one thing I've learned about business is if you're in business, the ground is always shaking under your feet. You're either moving with it or it's going to crush you and your building's going to fall down on top of you when it starts really shaking. And so what we decided to do as a business is we don't compete in that realm at all. We're not major manufacturers. We are really high-end custom rifle makers. And we want to put ourselves in an area where they call it like the red ocean and the blue ocean. When you got the red ocean and everybody's in there fighting it out, with blood in the water and beating each other up because they're all doing the same thing, right? They're all making the rifles the same way, and it doesn't matter if it's custom or not. And then what we decided to do is we're going to go a totally different avenue and make rifles the way that they've never been made before, completely reinvent the wheel on not only the parts that are used, but the processes as well to ensure that perfect part. And then that puts us in what we call a blue ocean, which means we're the only ones out here sailing around. And we've got the luxury to keep working and growing and getting the word out that, hey, we have a product out there that might be worth taking a look at. We have an answer to an accuracy problem that might help your rifle shoot better, that might help you shoot better, that might get you more enjoyment out of your time in the field. So if you get a chance, you can stop over to our website. It's wolfprecision.net. We'd love to see you. Check out some of the cool stuff that we're doing. If you want to experience one of the rifles, of course, you're always more than welcome to come into one of our long-range shooting schools. We have them on the line here every year. Before I continue on and finish up the podcast, I do want to say a quick thanks to MDT. MDT is also a proud sponsor of the show and maker of great chassis, from the legendary ACC chassis right down to the new HNT26 carbon fiber hunting chassis. So stop over to mdttac.com, mdttac.com, and don't forget about TriggerTech. Now, TriggerTech is a maker of fine triggers. We put the TriggerTech Special in all of our custom rifles here with the option of the Diamond upgrade for the tactical rifles. So if you want a world-class trigger that's safe and user-friendly and end-user adjustable, stop over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com today. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. We really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to share it with others who enjoy long-range shooting, please, that helps us out a lot. If you don't mind stopping over and giving us a 5-star rating, that really helps in our standings and ratings when people are searching for long-range shooting. So we really do appreciate that as well. So thank you so much. My name is Jamie Dotson, and you're listening to Wolf Precision's Long-Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.